The world as we know it has just shifted on its axis, and we have officially entered a new and terrifying era of high-intensity, multi-domain conflict. For years, we have covered the shadow wars, the proxy skirmishes, and the diplomatic tightropes walked by global superpowers in the Middle East. But on the morning of Saturday, February 28, 2026, the shadow war was dragged violently into the daylight. The United States and Israel launched a massive, unprecedented, and highly coordinated daylight military strike deep into the heart of the Islamic Republic of Iran. The Pentagon is calling their portion of the campaign Operation Epic Fury, while the Israeli defense establishment has named their offensive Operation Roaring Lion, carrying on a biblical naming convention that signals total war. This is not a limited border skirmish or a surgical strike designed merely to send a geopolitical message. This is a full-scale confrontation aimed directly at the survival of a 47-year-old regime. As we speak, ballistic missiles are raining down on United States military bases across the Persian Gulf in fierce retaliation. The incredibly vital Strait of Hormuz is under imminent threat of closure, and global financial markets are bracing for absolute, unmitigated chaos. If you want to understand exactly what just happened, what advanced weapons were deployed, the historical catalysts that brought us to the brink of World War III, and how this will impact your wallet at the gas pump, you are in exactly the right place. Let's dive right into the comprehensive breakdown. Starting with the Geopolitical Situation Report, or SITREP, for February 28, 2026, the sheer scale of this joint kinetic operation is simply staggering to comprehend. United States and Israeli forces bypassed the traditional Iranian proxy networks entirely, deciding instead to target key Iranian military infrastructure, nuclear research facilities, and top-tier leadership compounds directly on Iranian sovereign soil. The immediate global fallout is severe and multifaceted. Analysts and economists are projecting a massive 25% surge in global energy prices across the oil and gas sectors, coupled with an estimated 15% reduction in regional trade almost overnight. Within mere hours of the initial combat sorties, casualty estimates on the ground surpassed 500 combatants, indicating a highly lethal opening phase of the war. This is the very definition of a geopolitical earthquake. The threat to regional partners, international supply chains, and global maritime traffic is at an all-time high. The world is effectively holding its collective breath as the dust settles over the Iranian capital of Tehran. To ensure a comprehensive understanding of this incredibly complex and rapidly developing crisis, we are going to structure this broadcast into several critical segments. First, we will examine the campaign objectives and overarching grand strategy of the US and Israel. Second, we will take a highly detailed look at the execution of the strikes, the specific cutting-edge military hardware utilized, and the exact targets that were annihilated. Third, we will break down Iran's immediate, fiery retaliation across the Middle East. Finally, we will analyze the terrifying economic shockwaves rippling through global markets and outline the two most likely strategic scenarios for the future of the region. Diving into the core strategy behind Operation Epic Fury, the stated objective is nothing short of monumental. Make no mistake, the United States and Israel did not launch this offensive merely to degrade a few missile silos or send a diplomatic message. The ultimate, openly stated goal is the complete destruction of Iran's nuclear and ballistic missile infrastructure, acting as the catalyst for the violent overthrow of the 47-year-old Islamic Republic. The military and political architects of this campaign are banking entirely on the rapid collapse of the regime from within, triggered by the overwhelming external pressure of the airstrikes. However, the retaliation from Tehran is already well underway. Iran immediately fired heavy barrages of ballistic missiles at sovereign U.S. bases situated across the Gulf nations, including facilities in Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, and the United Arab Emirates. Furthermore, the economic threat this poses is truly existential for global energy markets. The conflict places the incredibly narrow Strait of Hormuz, a vital maritime choke point responsible for approximately 20% of all global petroleum flows, at critical, immediate risk. Analysts and commodities traders are already projecting that crude oil will violently spike to between $90 and $100 per barrel as panic sets in across the trading floors of London, New York, and Tokyo. The execution of this military masterpiece was breathtaking in its scale, precision, and audacity. At precisely 9:27 local time on a Saturday morning, which is notably the first day of the regular work week in Iran, the skies essentially opened up. The opening sortie of the operation, referred to by the Israelis as Operation Genesis, involved a massive, highly coordinated flyover utilizing approximately 200 Israeli Defense Force fighter jets operating in seamless tandem with heavy United States military assets. To pull off a penetration of this magnitude into some of the most heavily defended airspace on the planet, both nations had to deploy the absolute pinnacle of their arsenals. The target list was comprehensive and unsparing. military command centers, ballistic missile production facilities, radar installations, and nuclear research infrastructure in Karaj, Tehran, Qum, Kermanshah, and Isfahan were systematically dismantled. Perhaps most shockingly, the operation targeted the very head of the Iranian state. The highly secure compound of Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, located in the Jamhuri area of Tehran, was struck by at least 7 precision missiles. Satellite imagery released shortly after the strikes confirmed that the facility was either heavily damaged or entirely destroyed, violently cutting the Supreme Leader off from all contact with his military commanders. The presidential office of Masoud Pezeshkian was also hit during the barrage, marking a decisive, unapologetic decapitation strike against the regime's top tier of leadership. Furthermore, Ali Shamkhani, the secretary of the Supreme National Security Council, was reportedly killed during the strikes on the capital. What exactly drives a military campaign of this staggering magnitude? The central theory of victory relies entirely on degrading the Iranian state's security and military apparatus so severely that it creates a power vacuum, empowering the deeply disgruntled domestic public to rise up and overthrow their oppressors. The directives from Western leadership are crystal clear. In a forceful 8-minute video address posted to his Truth Social platform, exactly 2 hours after the strikes began, U.S. President Donald Trump announced the campaign. Trump stated unequivocally that the objective is to completely raze the Iranian missile industry to the ground, annihilate the Iranian Navy, and permanently eliminate the regime's nuclear capability. Speaking directly to the Iranian people, Trump urged them to, quote, take over your government, promising that this will probably be your only chance for generations. He also issued a stark, terrifying ultimatum to the members of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. Lay down your arms immediately in exchange for amnesty, or face certain death. Meanwhile, Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz confirmed the attack, labeling it a preemptive measure designed to entirely remove existential threats to the state of Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praised the historic joint operation, declaring that it removes a threat to humanity and creates the precise conditions for the brave Iranian people to cast off the yoke of tyranny and take their destiny into their own hands. Interestingly, the Israeli operational name Roaring Lion heavily leans into biblical symbolism, continuing a tradition from the 2025 Rising Lion operation. The lion symbolizes the valor of the ancient tribe of Judah, drawing upon the Old Testament verse from Numbers chapter 23 verse 24. A people rises up like a lioness and like a lion, who dares to rouse him. The Islamic Republic of Iran, however, did not surrender or go quietly into the night. Activating its long-standing forward defense military doctrine, Iran immediately unleashed a fiery retaliatory barrage of dozens of heavy ballistic missiles and waves of kamikaze drones across the entire Middle East theater. The regime utilized the absolute best of its formidable domestic arsenal to strike back at the forces encircling it. Direct, catastrophic hits were reported on massive, critical United States infrastructure across the region. Iranian missiles successfully struck the U.S. Navy's 5th Fleet headquarters in Manama, Bahrain, with video footage circulating online showing thick black smoke rising from the island kingdom's capital. The Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, which is the largest U.S. military facility in the entire Middle East, along with the Al Salem Air Base in Kuwait and the Al Dhafra Air Base in the United Arab Emirates, all came under fierce, sustained attack. Simultaneously, the Iranian proxy network was activated to sow chaos on multiple fronts. Houthi forces in Yemen announced the immediate resumption of asymmetric attacks on Red Sea shipping routes and Israeli targets, while Iraqi militias, specifically the Popular Mobilization Forces, PMF, targeted regional bases, resulting in at least 3 PMF combatant deaths during the ensuing crossfire. The immediate, terrifying consequence of this massive exchange of ballistic fire was absolute regional paralysis. Commercial aviation ground to a complete halt. Airlines globally diverted or entirely canceled flights, as Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, and Syria shuttered their sovereign airspace to avoid civilian airliners being caught in the crossfire of advanced surface-to-air missile systems. Tragically, the human cost of the conflict mounted rapidly, exposing the grim reality of high-intensity warfare. According to the Iranian Red Crescent Society, within the first day of the strikes, at least 201 civilians were killed and 747 were reported injured across Iran. The most heartbreaking and controversial incident occurred in the southern Iranian city of Manab. During the American and Israeli bombing runs, a devastating strike decimated a girls' elementary school, referred to as the Shajara Tayyebe school airstrike. This catastrophic event resulted in an estimated 85 civilian casualties, drawing massive international outrage and complicating the narrative of a purely precision military campaign. 2 additional students were reportedly killed in an airstrike in Tehran. The civilian impact spilled violently over international borders as well. In Abu Dhabi, an Asian migrant worker was tragically killed by falling debris from an intercepted Iranian missile. In Syria, debris from an Iranian ballistic missile plummeted into a residential building in the city of Suwaida, resulting in the deaths of at least 4 civilians. Meanwhile, an apartment building in northern Israel was damaged by incoming fire, and a total of 89 Israeli civilians reported injuries during the conflict, though only 3 were directly hit by munitions. The sheer scale of the chaotic crossfire has left millions of civilians across the Middle East sheltering in place, terrified of what falls from the sky next. Inside Iran, citizens are experiencing a bizarre, terrifying split reality characterized by state-mandated panic and extreme information control. In a desperate bid to maintain order and control the narrative, the regime orchestrated massive, near-total internet blackouts. Connectivity dropped to a staggering 1% of normal levels, effectively blinding the populace to the outside world. State media broadcasted highly organized anti-US rallies, showing loyalists waving the Iranian flag and portraits of Ali Khamenei, while ordinary citizens panicked in incredibly long gas lines and heavy traffic. Yet, despite the draconian suppression, an underground resistance emerged. In select neighborhoods across Tehran and other major cities, brave citizens were seen laughing and celebrating the airstrikes, openly defacing regime symbols and chanting "Death to Khamenei" and "Death to the Veliat." Outside the country's borders, the global Iranian diaspora erupted in unbridled celebration. Massive solidarity rallies swept through major Western cities like The Hague, Strasbourg, Hamburg, and London. Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah and a leading opposition figure, designated February 14th as a global day of action for the Lion and Sun Revolution. Rallies drew staggering numbers, with 250,000 attendees confirmed in Munich alone, and roughly 350,000 gathering in both Toronto and Los Angeles. Pahlavi characterized the US and Israeli airstrikes as a necessary humanitarian intervention, urging the Iranian people and security forces to prepare for the inevitable collapse of the Islamic Republic. Concurrently, Maryam Rajavi, the leader of the National Council of Resistance of Iran, NCRI, formally announced preparations for a provisional, transitional government based in Berlin. To truly comprehend how the world arrived at the terrifying precipice of World War III, one must zoom out and look at the multi-year escalatory cycle. This was not a sudden flare-up. It was the inevitable culmination of a pressure cooker that has been building for nearly a decade. The fuse was officially lit back in 2018, with the United States' unilateral withdrawal from the JCPOA nuclear agreement, which initiated the devastating maximum pressure campaign of severe economic sanctions against Tehran. This diplomatic hostility exploded into open, albeit indirect, warfare during the 2023 and 2024 Gaza war. During this period, the Middle East saw continuous, grinding proxy engagements involving Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthi forces. But the critical turning point, the moment that set the stage for epic fury, occurred in June 2025. In the summer of 2025, the region witnessed the grueling 12-day Third Lebanon War, alongside an incredibly destructive U.S. military campaign known as Operation Midnight Hammer. During Midnight Hammer, a fleet of 125 U.S. military aircraft, including 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, dropped massive 30,000-pound GBU-57 penetrator bombs on Iranian nuclear sites at Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. The 2025 strikes reportedly destroyed roughly 20,000 nuclear centrifuges and severely dismantled Iran's weaponization program. However, despite that massive historic blow, the regime stubbornly rebuilt their capabilities, hiding highly enriched uranium in undamaged underground facilities, which led directly to the transition from gray zone skirmishes to the high-intensity, multi-domain conflict of February 2026. The immediate catalyst that exposed the regime's fatal vulnerabilities and provided the strategic opening for Operation Epic Fury occurred just weeks prior, in January 2026. Triggered by runaway inflation hitting 60%, a collapsing currency, and crippling economic isolation, the largest anti-government movement since the 1979 revolution swept across the nation. The scale of the uprising was unprecedented. Protests erupted in 185 cities, spanning all 31 provinces and 574 distinct locations. The state's response was nothing short of apocalyptic. The regime unleashed the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, the Basij militia, and foreign Iraqi Hashd al-Shabi mercenaries to violently and systematically suppress the uprising. In a horrifying 48-hour window, beginning on January 8th, independent medical networks and human rights organizations documented absolute carnage under the cover of a total internet blackout. The casualty figures are staggering and historically grim. while the Iranian government officially claimed only 3,117 deaths, and established organizations like the US-based human rights activists news agency, HRANA, verified 7,000 dead. Sources operating inside Iran report the massacre of at least 16,500 people, with some estimates reaching an unthinkable 32,000 fatalities. In Tehran alone, a single physician documented 217 deaths across 6 hospitals in one day, predominantly from live military ammunition, while leaked video footage from the Karizak morgue showed hundreds of stacked bodies. Furthermore, medical personnel reported the systematic use of military-grade weapons against unarmed civilians, resulting in an estimated 330,000 to 360,000 severe injuries. In one of the most chilling aspects of the crackdown, hospitals documented a deliberate regime strategy of mass blinding. At a single ophthalmology hospital in Tehran, the Noor Clinic, approximately 7,000 eye injuries were documented, with disturbing reports indicating over 800 eye enucleations performed in a single night as security forces intentionally targeted the faces of young protesters. This unprecedented domestic slaughter left the regime politically fractured, deeply despised by its populace, and incredibly fragile. Perhaps the most frustrating and controversial aspect of this massive conflict is the diplomatic backdrop. Throughout early 2026, the United States deployed a massive naval armada to the Middle East to apply maximum pressure on Tehran. This massive show of force included the aircraft carriers USS Abraham Lincoln and the USS Gerald R. Ford, flanked by numerous guided missile destroyers. Concurrently, intense, indirect nuclear negotiations were taking place in Muscat, Oman, and Geneva, Switzerland. The diplomatic breakthrough was reportedly agonizingly close. Just hours before the airstrikes commenced on February 28, Omani mediators announced that peace was entirely within reach. They alleged that Iran had finally agreed to permanently zero out its stockpiles of enriched uranium, irreversibly downgrade its nuclear infrastructure, and allow full, unhindered IAEA verification. However, the diplomatic track collapsed instantly as the first bombs fell. Critics internationally are loudly arguing that Operation Epic Fury represents a completely unprovoked war of choice that destroyed the best possible chance for non-proliferation in a generation. Conversely, proponents of the strikes argue that the regime was simply stalling for time, hiding their true weapons-grade uranium stockpiles in deep underground facilities that diplomacy could never reach. Unsurprisingly, the international community has fractured violently along established great power fault lines in the wake of the strikes. The offensive is wholly owned and executed by the United States and Israel. Their traditional defensive allies, including the European Union and the United Kingdom, have quickly deployed defensive air assets to protect their own regional interests, but they are urgently calling for maximum restraint and immediate de-escalation, terrified of a broader war. A UN Security Council emergency meeting was convened by the UK to address the rapidly deteriorating situation. On the other side of the geopolitical spectrum, Russia and China have strongly and vocally condemned the strikes as blatant violations of the UN Charter, with Russia accusing the United States of carelessly pushing the entire Middle Eastern region into the abyss. Caught in the terrifying fiery crossfire are the Gulf states, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Qatar. These nations vehemently condemn Iran's retaliatory missile strikes hitting their sovereign soil, while desperately lobbying diplomatic backchannels to avoid being dragged directly into an apocalyptic regional war that would devastate their economies. The geopolitical analysis must now shift to Beijing, which has implemented a robust, aggressive defensive strategy to protect its deep strategic partnership with Tehran. Motivated heavily by the dire need to protect billions of dollars in Belt and Road infrastructure investments and secure continuous, uninterrupted oil supplies, China has become a massive wildcard in this conflict. In the lead-up to the 2026 strikes, China was actively replenishing Iranian military hardware lost during the 2025 conflicts, supplying kamikaze drones, advanced air defense systems, and roughly 1,000 tons of sodium perchlorate, a crucial ingredient for solid rocket fuel. But the most alarming development is the expedited negotiation to supply Iran with the CM-302 supersonic anti-ship cruise missile. This weapon is an absolute nightmare for U.S. naval commanders. An export variant of China's YJ-12, the CM-302, is armed with a devastating 500-kilogram warhead, reaches blinding speeds of Mach 3 to Mach 4, and boasts an operational range of roughly 290 to 460 kilometers. It flies at incredibly low sea-skimming altitudes and utilizes advanced satellite guidance, BeiDou, and evasive terminal maneuvers to penetrate high-end air defenses, earning it the terrifying moniker of carrier killer. Furthermore, Beijing is helping Iran implement a cyber sovereignty strategy, replacing vulnerable Western software with closed, highly secure Chinese networks to thwart CIA and Mossad cyber sabotage. The most immediate and terrifying global peril revolves entirely around the Strait of Hormuz. This incredibly narrow waterway is unequivocally the world's most critical oil transit artery, handling roughly 20% of global petroleum consumption and 20% of the world's liquefied natural gas (LNG) trade. While the IRGC Navy fundamentally lacks the conventional naval firepower to enforce a traditional ship-to-ship naval blockade against the U.S. Navy, they rely heavily on deadly asymmetric tactics. Utilizing naval mines, swarms of fast attack craft, and shore-launched missiles like the newly acquired Chinese CM-302, they can inflict severe, localized damage. Radio intercepts have already recorded Iranian military forces broadcasting chilling messages to commercial vessels, stating explicitly that no ship is allowed to pass the Strait of Hormuz. The terrifying economic reality is that an actual physical blockade isn't even necessary. The sheer threat of asymmetric disruption makes commercial shipping utterly uninsurable. This effectively paralyzes commercial traffic, threatening to starve the Asian energy markets, specifically China, India, Japan, and South Korea, who rely on the strait for over 80% of their Middle Eastern crude imports, and creating an energy crisis of historic proportions. The market ramifications of this conflict are unfolding with terrifying whiplash speed. Upon the opening of Asian financial markets, Brent crude oil is forecasted to experience a catastrophic, violent spike. Economists project prices to shoot straight past the recent $73 mark into the $90 to $100 per barrel range. If the Strait of Hormuz is functionally closed, experts warn prices could easily double, surging as high as $120 to $150 a barrel, mirroring the devastating peaks seen in 2008. Global investors are completely panicking, executing rapid and massive capital flight into traditional safe havens to protect their wealth. Assets are moving aggressively into the US dollar, the Swiss franc, which has already gained 3% this year, and gold, which has surged an astonishing 22% in 2026 alone. The volatility is palpable. The VIX Volatility Index has climbed by roughly 1/3, and implied volatility in US bond markets has risen 15%. Middle East stock exchanges are bracing for impact, with Gulf equities in Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Dubai estimated to fall between 3 and 5%. The macroeconomic threat here is profound. Sustained supply chain disruptions and violent energy spikes threaten to immediately reignite global inflation, adding an estimated 0.6 to 0.7 percentage points to global inflation rates. This scenario will likely force central banks worldwide to abruptly halt their planned interest rate cuts, pushing struggling Western economies much closer to a deep recession. Looking ahead to the aftermath of the bombings, leading geopolitical analysts are modeling two primary, heavily contrasting scenarios for the future of Iran and the broader Middle East. Scenario A envisions a rapid regime collapse. In this optimistic strategic win for the West, the US and Israeli military campaign successfully decapitates the supreme leader and his key commanders. The Iranian security apparatus, already battered by the January uprisings, fractures entirely. This allows the domestic populace and the diaspora opposition to seize control and establish a secular provisional government, permanently neutralizing a 47-year geopolitical threat. However, the severe, glaring risk here is the creation of a prolonged ultra-violent power vacuum. A sudden collapse could require immense multi-trillion-dollar global stabilization efforts, eerily reminiscent of the chaotic, bloody aftermaths of post-2003 Iraq or post-Gaddafi Libya. Scenario B paints a far darker, more cynical picture: the emergence of IRG system. In this nightmare trajectory, the clerical regime survives the initial onslaught. They masterfully utilize the foreign attacks to rally nationalist sentiment, completely sideline any remaining moderate political factions, and violently suppress all internal dissent under the guise of wartime security. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, completely consolidates absolute overt military control over the state, dropping the religious facade. In this scenario, Iran abandons all pretenses of nuclear diplomacy, rapidly sprints toward a weaponized nuclear deterrent within weeks, and locks the United States and its regional allies into a grueling, decades-long asymmetric war of attrition. Ultimately, the Middle East has officially transitioned from a theater of gray zone proxy competition to one of devastating, high-intensity kinetic conflict. The previous geopolitical models of strategic patience, measured diplomacy, and calibrated deterrence have been permanently, irrevocably abandoned by all parties involved. The region has plunged headfirst into a comprehensive confrontation with undetermined boundaries and absolutely no clear endgame in sight. The coming weeks will answer the ultimate, defining question of our generation. Can overwhelming Western military force successfully engineer a geopolitical transformation and topple an entrenched regime? Or will Operation Epic Fury simply ignite an enduring, borderless, and catastrophic global war? Audiences are witnessing history unfold in real time, and the ripple effects will be felt in every nation on Earth. To stay informed on the rapidly shifting tactical movements, the economic fallout, and the breaking updates regarding Operation Epic Fury, make sure you hit that subscribe button, engage with the content in the comments below, and share this broadcast. The world is watching, and we will be here to cover every second of it.